My name's Ivar Nelson, and I was the founder and owner of Bookpeople of Moscow in its first incarnation. From 1973, November 19th, 1973 is when it opened, until I sold to Bob Greene in 1981. For those 8 years, those wonderful 8 years in Moscow. Well, I actually came out to Idaho from St. Louis, Missouri in 1973, and it came to Coeur d'Alene first and found it was on the lake. It was a gorgeous little town, but it was also not much was happening there. It was pretty much focused around Dorian Hagedorn and his enterprises. And I visited down to Moscow, and it was kind of a little sleepy college town, but just beginning to take off. It was taking off because a lot of young professors were coming in because of a new boom of students. And that was sort of the time of the Back to the Land movement, where a lot of people came from the East Coast and moved to Idaho and these areas. So I thought, well, I'll go down and take a look at Moscow. So drove down here one day and drove up and down Main Street and went to the student bookstore. And the student bookstore had some books other than textbooks, but not very much. On Main Street, there was a thing called Peggotty's Books, which had two stands of mass paperbacks, and that was it. And I thought, well, maybe I could do a bookstore here. And as I drove up the street, I noticed that there was another bookstore in the Moscow Hotel, and it was called Crossroads Books. And I didn't go in. I thought, well, okay, they got a bookstore already. So I went back to Coeur d'Alene and was looking around and still trying to decide what to do in Idaho. I really wanted to live in this area of the world. And we ran across somebody who said, well, why don't you start a bookstore in Moscow? And I said, well, no, they already have a bookstore. And she said, what? And I said, well, it's right on Main Street there. And she said, well, that's a very specialized bookstore. It's a Christian bookstore. So the next day I came back and took a closer look and realized that here was two university towns, both growing very rapidly in Pullman and Moscow, and neither one had a real bookstore, a real independent bookstore. So that was it. Moved down here, called up Beth Kenworthy. She had a former pet store that was between the two movie theaters that she owned. It's actually not even a self-standing building. It's made of rafters strung between the two movie theaters. And it had closed. And she said, well, here's a site, would you be interested? And we opened the door, and I became quite uninterested very quickly because the pet store hadn't done a very good job of cleaning up afterwards. But we took it, we rented it, we peroxided and bleached the whole place, put in a lot of good wood and cedar and stuff like that, and opened that fall in November. Yeah. So it was quite exciting at that time. The opening day for us was rather harrowing because we were supposed to open at 8 o'clock. And at 7:45, I discovered that I had misplaced the key to the bookstore. So I had to go running around, had to run out to Beth Kenworthy's house, get a key, come down. I arrived after 8 o'clock, to 8:15. And there were 5 people waiting at the bookstore for it to open, which was, of course, a good sign. But immediately, a woman, an elderly woman with a cane, but very robust, whose name was Slade. Can't remember her first name. She waved the cane at me and said, young man, this is no way to start a business. So that was the beginning, and it was an immediate success. People flocked to the bookstore, and we had opened up with a basic stock. A lot of books were face out because we didn't have a lot, and with the thought that, well, it's it's a month and a half before Christmas or a month before Christmas. Maybe this will hold us. Well, the second weekend we were there, we were driving the pickup to Seattle with a tarp to the wholesaler. We marched into the wholesaler, filled up the shopping carts, filled up the pickup, put the tarp on, and drove back because we were selling the books so fast. We had to restock very, very quickly. We made a trip every weekend before Christmas to restock the store. I mean, it was just an absolute zoo. Moscow was a community coming alive at that time. It really was, and a lot was happening. It was during the 70s was the time when Bookpeople started. The good food store started, which eventually became the Moscow Co-op. I think it was in the 70s that Rendezvous in the Park started. I think it was then that the Renaissance Fair started, or was that later?
Rendezvous, no.
Rendezvous was later?
Oh,
Okay.
later.
Renaissance started then. Sometimes they blend. And so a lot of things were happening. We started Moscow Downtown Association at that time, which later, I think, disappeared and then reappeared again. So it was a time, in a way, I think, a lot like the time now where Moscow is sort of having a lot of vital things happening downtown. So it was a great time. And the store blossomed, absolutely. It was a time when bookstores were important, and Bookpeople became one of the gathering places of the Moscow community. It was very exciting. It was. Yeah. It gave a certain part of the community a place to exchange information. I mean, what happens at that time with bookstores is the people working in them would be told something in the morning that they would then pass on to other people. So it became sort of a word of mouth broadcaster of information. And out of that came one of the things, I'll give you an example, was a group that Mary Giddings and who worked there, and Libby Davison and myself and others started, called the Friends Of. And the Friends Of was a group to bring people to the community to do readings, to do speaking, to sing, whatever. And some of the noteworthy ones, I can remember we had Gary Snyder come. So it was the Friends of Gary Snyder was the name of it for that. And we invited him to speak, and we arranged for him to speak in David's department store, which is now, which was then and now on the corner of 3rd and Main, and had closed. The old department store had closed. It was empty. So we had Gary Snyder speak read his poetry from the steps inside that go to the second floor of the David's department store. It was stunning. There must have been hundreds of people there hanging from the balconies, packing the floor. And we did that for him. We brought in Robert Bly, who did one of his mask presentations and poetry at the old Grange Hall next to what used to be the newspaper on Jackson. We brought in a wonderful singer, I'll never forget, named Holly Neer from San Francisco, who sang at the university. So that was the kind of community thing that came out of the connections at the bookstore. I think that the fact that it is still going today indicates how important that kind of a place is to the cohesiveness of a community, the health of a community. And it was right at in 1980-81 that we did 3rd and Main Project, which I was one of the organizers of, which basically solidified the downtown as the center of the Moscow community, and I think that's been an enormous success to this very day. So it was a great time. And everybody at the place, we had incredibly good staff. They came from different parts of the country, had some bookstore experience, would come in. to the store and say, do you got any, do you got any room? You got a job, maybe part-time? So Rob and Emily Moore dropped down from Canada after going up there. From California, Libby Davidson came in, and a lot of other people came through and worked at the store for a while and took a very active part in the community, and it was a great time. And my partner, who I started with, Betty Devereaux, she was there, got her master's degree in English, and then she moved to Denver. So she was very active. That a lot of them went on to the book business afterwards. Jeff Stone went on to Bantam. Betty went on to Simon & Schuster. Various ones went on to work in other bookstores when they left Moscow. When I was still there, I started a monthly journal here in Moscow called Peluche Journal, which went on for about 15 years, 10 or 15 years. It was a tabloid, a free tabloid that was handed out. It actually introduced many of the literary lights around here, like Bob Wrigley and Kim Barnes, to the public for the first time, and artists like that also, of that noteworthy. So I did that, and then for a while, and then I eventually ended up being the press director at the University of Idaho Press, and then on to another university press and some other publishing opportunities. So I'm a book publisher, I'm a bookie, I'm a book people. That's when Betty and I started the store, we called it Bookpeople of Moscow. And Bookpeople, of course, is the name of the people in Fahrenheit 451 who worked to preserve books when the duty of the firemen was to burn them. And so we took that title, and then we set up Moscow because there was a wholesaler in Berkeley called Bookpeople also. So we wanted to differentiate from that. But here we are, 40 years later. Then with Peluche Journal, I then started a publishing company called Solstice Press, and we published history and natural history books, local history books. We published 4 books. We started packaging books for national publishers. So we did a bunch of them about camping. So we did one called Ski Camping with Ron Waters, who went on to Idaho State University. We did bicycle camping with Diana Armstrong, who's still in town. We did horse camping with George Hatley. And we did river camping with Vern Hughes, who was from Minnesota. And those were published by Doubleday nationally. So we did a bunch of publishing, and we ran a distribution business called North Country Book Express, which Jim Prohl ran for a while for us, drove the white van all over the Northern Rockies, selling books to bookstores, and which really helped a lot of the local publishers. We were very big on that. It's interesting, that was a time when bookstores really were a cultural institution that brought people together and brought the larger world through books to readers. And they played a very, very important role. And of course, that's changed a lot now. But at that time, a best-selling book, or a book that we sold well, really indicated the mood of the country and what was happening. So, for example, books that we sold well, we sold Joy of Cooking, which is the classical cookbook, but then came Joy of Sex, which sold very, very well in the college community. We sold very well All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein about the Nixon years. We had big arguments about books. One that we had for a while was called the Anarchist Cookbook. And it basically was how to make bombs. So we started selling that in the 70s and then thought, well, maybe this is not such a good idea. So we dropped that. For a couple weeks, we sold a book that turned out to be basically articles stolen from J.D. Salinger, which is interesting now because the movies just came out about him. And it was one of the books that was recalled by publishers because it turned out that he hadn't given permission for it to be published. So we had a lot of fun with that kind of stuff. Tolkien was still big. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was very big. All Things Wise and Wonderful. James Herriot had 3 or 4 books that sold extremely well. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee represented all the things that were happening with the Native Americans in this country. And then, of course, the Whole Earth Catalog, which came out of the 60s and was very much a back to the land book. The book that we sold well, which really we sold so well we were stunned, which people might not remember, but was a gorgeous book called Handmade Houses. And it was houses made of wood in different ways on the West Coast. That was everybody's fantasy book. People would get it, just look at the pictures and think about, maybe I could make a house like that. You were mentioning building a house, so, there you go.
I've got the book.
Huh?
I've got the
And
book.
you've got the book, okay. We sold local books. One that was really memorable at that time was, and again, a neighbor of yours down there, Carla Emery, wrote a book called The Old Fashioned Cookbook, and it was about going back to the land. And she made this book in her house, mimeographed it up, and put it together. And if you wanted a copy, you had to go down to her house, walk around the tables, and help her collate it. It took about a day. And at the end of the day, you got paid by getting a copy of the book. So I have that copy. I have a copy that then Bantam Books bought it from her for an enormous amount of money at that time, like $100,000. And they published it for a while, and then it was picked up by a publisher in Seattle. So it was a book that kept on going, and it was the handbook for going back to the land, basically, So it was a local book that did really well, So we did that for Bookpeople went on, and then in the late 70s, there started happening in D.C. first, Washington, D.C., a bookstore started a coffee house in the bookstore, and that still exists on DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., although the coffee house is now a restaurant, quite a good one. And so we picked up that idea and encouraged a number of people in the community, which I know you were one, and Callie Thurman and others, to start a coffee house adjoining to us on the backstage of the Kenworthy Theater. So we closed off the proscenium at the Kenworthy Theater between the stage and the movie screen, and opened up the wall between the bookstore and that backstage, and they created this wonderful little coffee house called Cafe Libre, and it went on for a number of years. I remember we did one Christmas. We did Dylan Thomas's Christmas in Wales there, and people did it from different parts of the coffee house. It was great fun. So there was that sense of a community. There was a sense of energy. It was very vital kind of time at that time. So that's why I am so delighted to see Bookpeople of Moscow continues downtown, of course, across the street where Bob moved it, and is doing so well. And it was really nice to see that Nicole and Werner, Stefan Werner and Carol Sperling have bought it and doing such a great job with it. And they really have the right idea. They have enormous amount of activities there. They're very involved in the community. A bookstore now very definitely has to have that function of being a gathering spot in the community. And what's so nice about Moscow now is we have lots of those. We have the Kenworthy Theater, we have the Co-op, we have coffee houses. It's just, the downtown is doing very well. It's very different than when I came in 1973, but it's very lively too. It's great. One of the great things that happened when we started it is our involvement with the local artist community. And we were fortunate to have Liz Mowry, who was a wonderful artist here at that time, do our logo, which lasted for 35 years and was this wonderful scene of the Peluche. There's a story also about the sign that we had, the Bookpeople of Moscow sign, which still exists and which is still above the store on Main Street, was done by a wood artist named John Rempel. And John was very close to having finished it. He had been working on it. It's a carved sign with the letters Bookpeople of Moscow, and then it has, or Book People, and then it has a lion and some other stylized figures in it. Well, John was working on it in the winter, and at the time that he was working on it, he had a car accident and died on a trip up to Peluche. And it was 3/4, 9/10 finished. And George Driscoll, who was a fellow artist, finished the sign. And you can go there today, and if you look at the carved lion, you will see that the lion has a tear coming down its cheek. And that tear is for John Rempel. And it's a wonderful thing that George did in remembrance of John and his involvement at that time. Architecturally also, we took the bookstore and changed it around so that it opened up both in the back and the front of the front on Main Street and the back on the alley towards what was then the Safeway store. And we put in a big round window. Beth Kenworthy did that, and she did one also at the back of the theater for Cafe Libre. And then they created these brick walks up and down the alley, and those are still there today, and have sort of given a whole new life to that part of the town. And of course, they now face on the Co-op, which is one of the liveliest places in the town because they took over the old Safeway. So it's been it was a great time, and my feeling is that Moscow has these times when the town is very lively, things are happening here, and the 70s were certainly one of those times, and I think this decade is one of those times now too.